Some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. That was the first thing they missed. My name is Earl McCaffrey. I'm 61 years old, and for 34 of those years, I was the master rigger and offshore platform superintendent for Neptune 7, a deep-water oil rig that sat like a steel island in the Gulf of Mexico. The kid who fired me didn't look up from his laptop when I walked in. His name was Preston Whitmore III. He was 26. The nameplate on his desk was gleaming brass, heavier than anything he'd likely ever lifted. His office was sterile, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive cologne. A framed diploma from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth hung on the wall, perfectly level. It looked like it had been delivered yesterday. Through the window behind him, the real world of grit and steel and salt spray seemed a million miles away. Here, in the climate-controlled Houston headquarters, the only elements were filtered air and corporate ambition. "Earl," he said, his voice flat, still typing. He pronounced my name like it was a piece of grit he'd found in his salad. "Have a seat." I didn't. I stood there in my work boots, the ones with the steel toes worn smooth, and waited. My hands, thick with calluses from a lifetime of turning wrenches and gripping steel cable, were steady at my sides. He finally closed the laptop with a soft click. He folded his manicured hands on the polished mahogany desk. He wore a crisp, white shirt with no tie, and a pair of sockless Ferragamo loafers that probably cost more than my first truck. He had the soft, unlined face of a man who had never been woken up at 3 a.m. by a pressure alarm screaming bloody murder. "We're moving in a new direction, Earl," he began, reciting lines from a script he'd no doubt rehearsed. "It's about embracing automation, optimizing our workflows, and transitioning away from legacy systems." Legacy systems. That was me. I was a legacy system. I had built the hydraulic tensioning array on Neptune 7 with my own 2 hands back in 1988. I knew every groan, every shudder, every valve that stuck on a humid day. I was the platform's institutional memory, written in scar tissue and engine grease. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're going to want to see how this one ends. He pushed a manila envelope across the desk. It slid to a stop a few inches from the edge. "This is your severance package. It's quite generous. We appreciate your decades of service." He said decades of service, like he was talking about a piece of antique furniture. I didn't touch the envelope. I just looked at him. A dead calm settled over me. There was no rage, no panic, just a cold, hard clarity. The kind you get when a storm is bearing down and you have to secure a 200-ton crane in a 60-knot wind. You don't get emotional. You get methodical. "Your time here is over," he said, a little smirk playing on his lips. He thought this was the end. He thought he was closing a chapter, trimming the fat, making his mark. What he hadn't realized was that he was about to learn the difference between authority and control. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. He seemed surprised by my lack of protest. He probably had a whole speech prepared for a tearful, begging old man. He gestured toward the door. "Security will escort you out. Please leave your badge and keys with them." I nodded once. I turned and walked out of the sterile office, leaving the envelope and his triumphant smirk behind. I didn't need his generous package. I had something far more valuable. 2 days before the humiliation, I was on the platform. The Neptune 7 wasn't a pretty thing. It was a monument to function over form, a tangle of pipes, catwalks, and steel girders painted a faded industrial yellow. The air tasted of salt and diesel fumes, a smell I'd come to associate with home. The constant hum of the generators was the rig's heartbeat. I was in the tensioner control room, my domain. It was a cramped space filled with analog gauges, heavy levers, and a single, surprisingly modern biometric scanner next to the main console. The air was thick with the scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone. This was the rig's nervous system, and I was its brain. The hydraulic tensioners were what kept Neptune 7 anchored to the seafloor, 5,000 feet below. They were a web of 16 massive steel tendons, each held at a precise pressure, constantly adjusting to the pull of the currents and the push of the waves. If that pressure failed, the platform would drift. If it failed catastrophically, the platform would capsize. A young engineer, a kid named Dave, was with me. He was smart, but he trusted his tablet more than his eyes. The diagnostic says we have a pressure fluctuation in line 7, Earl. I didn't look at his screen. I put my hand on the housing of the number 7 pump. I could feel a faint, irregular vibration through the thick steel plate. It was a rhythm I knew better than my own pulse. It's not the pressure. It's the return valve. It's getting sticky. But the software, he started. The software reads the effect, not the cause, I said, grabbing a 3-foot wrench. The valve isn't closing fast enough, so the pressure drops for a millisecond before the pump compensates. The computer sees a dip. I feel a stutter. I gave a calibrated, forceful turn to a lock nut that wasn't in any manual. The vibration smoothed out instantly. The needle on the analog gauge for line 7 stopped its nervous twitching and held rock steady. Dave stared from the gauge to me. "How did you know that?" 34 years of listening, I told him. That was my value. I was the guy you called when the diagnostic software hit a wall, when the lawyers were circling after an incident, when a hurricane was on the horizon and the evacuation protocols had to be executed flawlessly. My knowledge wasn't in a database. It was in my bones. It was the accumulation of 1,000,000 tiny observations, 1,000 solved problems that were never written down. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, and my son's high school graduation because some piece of machinery decided to throw a fit at the worst possible time. I had sacrificed a normal life for this platform, for the company that owned it. And in return, I was paid well. $162,000 a year plus offshore bonuses. It was enough to put 2 kids through college and set my wife, Martha, up for a comfortable retirement. The breaking point came in February 2020. That's when the old CEO, a man who had started as a roughneck himself, retired. His replacement was a numbers guy from Wall Street, and he brought in his own people. People like Preston Whitmore III, whose father sat on the board of directors. Preston was a turnaround expert, a specialist in optimization. He arrived on the platform one Tuesday morning in a helicopter, wearing a brand new set of fire-retardant coveralls over his Armani suit. They were so clean, they still had the creases from the packaging. He walked the platform with his tablet, taking pictures and making notes. He didn't talk to the crew. He didn't ask questions. He just observed, his face a mask of detached analysis. He looked at us like we were old, inefficient machines. He saw my control room with its analog gauges and manual levers and saw something antiquated. He called it legacy. I called it reliable. Digital systems could be hacked, could fail in a power surge. My levers worked as long as a man had the strength to pull them. He never once asked me what the biometric scanner was for. The origin of my secret weapon was not born of malice, but of prudence, and a very wise, very old lawyer. Back in 2013, a competitor's rig in the South China Sea had a tensioner failure. It was a catastrophic event. The platform capsized, and the environmental damage was immense. The subsequent investigation led to a wave of new, draconian regulations from the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, the BSEE. A BSEE inspector, a humorless man in a government polo shirt, spent a week on Neptune 7. He went over every inch of my system. On his last day, he sat in my control room and pointed to the pressure gauges. "Your system operates at over 5,000 psi, he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. 5,200 on a calm day." Then you fall under the new mandate 1138C, he said, handing me a thick binder. As of 90 days from now, any tensioning system operating above 5,000 PS, I must be overseen by a Level 4 Master Rigger with a specific BSEE certification. That certification is non-transferable and tied directly to the operator. The company's chief counsel at the time was a man named Frank Miller. Frank was old school. He wore rumpled suits and believed in handshakes, but he read every contract, every regulation, down to the last comma. He flew out to the rig with the new compliance paperwork. We sat in the galley, drinking thick, black coffee. Here's the thing, Earl, Frank said, tapping a paragraph in the mandate. This certification is a bear. Requires 10 years of documented experience on this specific type of hydraulic system. You're the only one in the entire company who qualifies. We have younger guys, good riggers, but none of them have the logged hours on this legacy hardware. So I take a test, I asked. More than that, Frank said. The BSEE is requiring a failsafe to ensure the certified operator is always on duty or has signed off. The control system has to be retrofitted with a biometric lock. It will require your thumbprint to authorize any major adjustments and to perform the hourly system integrity check. Without that check, the system will enter a safe mode lockdown after 72 hours. It will freeze all tensioners at their last recorded pressure. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Earl, this makes you more than an employee. It makes you a key to a billion-dollar asset. This piece of paper, he said, tapping the BSEE certificate with my name on it, is more valuable than your pension. The company can't operate this platform without you, or someone with your exact, rare qualification. Remember that. I remembered. I had that certificate framed in my den at home. Preston Whitmore III had never seen it. He had never asked to. It was a piece of paper buried in a filing cabinet in a dusty records room, a relic of a legacy system he was so eager to replace. After security walked me to the lobby, I didn't go straight home. I drove my 1989 Chevy Suburban with its faded "These Colors Don't Run" bumper sticker to Murphy's Diner. The old truck's AM radio was tuned to a talk show, the host's voice a low drone that I barely heard. The truck was salt-corroded, and the paint was peeling, but the Cummins diesel engine under the hood was immaculate. I'd rebuilt it myself. I understood it. I sat in a booth and ordered a black coffee. The waitress, a woman who had been working there since I was a young man, just nodded. She knew my order. I watched the traffic go by. There was no anger. The dead calm had taken over completely. A switch had flipped in my head. For 34 years, I had been a loyal company man. I had put their needs ahead of my own, ahead of my family's. Loyalty, I had always believed, was a two-way street. They had just turned it into a dead end. My mind was already working, not on revenge, but on strategy. The 72-hour clock had started the moment I walked out of that building. Preston, in his arrogance, would be celebrating. He'd send a company-wide email filled with his favorite buzzwords. A new paradigm of efficiency. Moving forward into the digital future. Synergistic realignment. He would see my empty chair as a victory. He was a manager. He operated on flowcharts and quarterly reports. He made decisions from scripts. He assumed the boring paperwork had been handled by someone else. He assumed the automated system he'd championed would just work. He didn't know the automation he'd purchased was designed to be an assistant to a skilled operator, not a replacement. It could monitor and make micro adjustments, but it couldn't authorize a full system bypass or override a pressure warning without the certified operator's biometric approval. It was a safety feature, mandated by federal law, a law he had never bothered to read. I finished my coffee, left a $10 bill on the table, and drove home. Martha was in the garden. She saw my truck pull in and knew immediately. It was 4 hours before my shift was supposed to end. In 34 years, I had never come home early without calling. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Earl, what is it?" "They let me go," I said, my voice steady. She didn't gasp or cry. She was a strong woman, the wife of a man who worked a dangerous job 1,000 miles away for weeks at a time. She just nodded, her eyes searching mine. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to work on the boat," I said, "and I'm going to wait for a phone call." The first 24 hours were quiet. I spent the day in my garage, working on the engine of my small fishing boat. It was a simple, mechanical thing, and the familiar feel of the tools in my hands was comforting. I methodically cleaned the carburetor, replaced the spark plugs, and changed the oil. My company phone was in a drawer in the kitchen, turned off. My personal phone sat on the workbench, silent. I knew what was happening on Neptune 7. The system would be performing its hourly integrity checks. Each hour, it would send a query to the biometric scanner, expecting a response. For 24 hours, it would log the failure as an operator non-responsive error, a yellow flag. Preston's new team, a group of young software engineers who worked from a remote operations center in Dallas, would see the alerts. They would likely dismiss them as glitches, a common occurrence when phasing out old hardware. They'd probably try to reboot the monitoring software. They'd assume it was a software bug, not a fundamental, legally mandated operational requirement. Martha and I had dinner on the porch that evening. It was the first Tuesday night dinner we'd had together in years. It felt strange, peaceful. The second day, the 48-hour mark, is when the real problems would have started. The system, having received no biometric authorization for 2 full days, would have escalated its alerts. The yellow flags would turn to flashing red alarms in the control room on the rig and at the remote center in Dallas. The system would be screaming for its certified operator. I imagined Preston getting the call. His underlings, the ones who were supposed to be managing the new automated system, would be confused. Their flowcharts wouldn't have a procedure for this. They'd be telling him the tensioner array was refusing to accept remote commands. They'd be telling him the system was locking them out. Communication overload would begin. Emails would fly. Conference calls would be convened. They would be treating it as a technical problem, a stubborn piece of hardware. They still wouldn't understand it was a legal and procedural problem. I spent that day fixing a leaky faucet in the bathroom, a task I'd been putting off for 6 months. The satisfaction of tightening the final nut and seeing the drip stop was immense. Simple problems, simple solutions. That evening, my personal phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave, the young engineer from the rig. "Earl, they can't get the tensioners to respond. Everyone's scrambling. You know anything about this?" I texted back a single sentence. "Tell your boss to read BSEE Mandate 1138C. I knew that text would be like dropping a match into a bucket of gasoline. The 72-hour mark hit at 11 a.m. on the third day. I was in my recliner, reading a book. Right on schedule, as designed by the unsmiling man from the BSEE all those years ago, the system would have executed its final command, safe mode lockdown. Every one of the 16 hydraulic tensioners would freeze in place. All remote access would be severed. The pumps would shut down. On the platform, klaxons would be blaring. Every screen in the control room would flash the same message: system lockdown. Manual override requires BSE Level 4. Operator. Biometric authentication required. The platform wasn't in immediate danger of capsizing, not in calm seas, but it was now, for all intents and purposes, a dead ship. Production would halt instantly. That alone cost the company $1.2 million a day. But worse, much worse, the BSEE would have received an automatic high-priority notification the second the system went into lockdown. They would know, in real time, that a billion-dollar platform was operating without federally mandated oversight. The fines would be astronomical. An immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel would be required by law. The dominoes were falling, exactly as I knew they would. At 11:15 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID said Preston Whitmore. I ignored it. It went to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. I ignored it. A text message appeared. McCaffrey, call me. Urgent. I continued reading my book. At 11:30 a.m., a new number called. The headquarters main line. I let it ring. Then, at 11:45 a.m., a number I didn't recognize. I decided it was time. I answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was strained, the corporate smoothness stripped away, leaving only raw panic. Earl, it's Preston Whitmore. Who? I asked, as if the name was unfamiliar. Whitmore, from the office. He sounded breathless. Listen, we have a situation on Neptune 7. The tensioning system is completely locked down. We have to evacuate the rig. The BSEE is all over us. We need you to come back. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I could hear the frantic noise of a crisis room in the background. Phones ringing. People shouting. Preston, I said, my voice calm and even. I don't work for you anymore. You made that very clear. My time with the company is over. I know, but this is an emergency. We can't get the system online. It's asking for a biometric key. Your key. Is that right? I said, feigning mild surprise. You seem to have overlooked a piece of federal regulation. BSEE mandate 1138C. It's been in the operational manual since 2013. The one that requires a licensed Level 4 operator with a biometric key. That's me. And since I'm no longer an employee, the system has, as you might say, been optimized into a locked state. It's a safety feature. There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. He was finally understanding. He wasn't dealing with a computer glitch. He was dealing with the consequences of his own arrogance. His authority meant nothing. The law, and my thumbprint, held all the control. What do you want? He finally whispered, the fight gone from his voice. I'm not an employee, Preston, I said, leaning back in my recliner. Employees get fired, but I'm willing to come back as a consultant. A consultant? Yes. Anything. We'll pay you. I let him dangle. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. My consulting fee is $85,000 a week, I said. There is a 4-week minimum, payable in advance. A car service will pick me up at my house and take me to the heliport. I'll also require a per diem for expenses. He sputtered. $85,000? A week? That's the rate, I said calmly. The platform is losing over $1 million a day. The BSEE fines will likely be in the tens of millions. My price seems quite reasonable by comparison. You can wire the first month's payment. That's $340,000 to an account I'm about to text you. Once the funds are confirmed, I'll be ready to go. He was silent. I could hear him breathing heavily. He was trapped. There's one more thing, I added, a non-negotiable condition. What? He asked, his voice weak. You are going to write a public apology. An apology to me for my wrongful termination after 34 years of dedicated service. You will read this apology, verbatim, at the next all-hands company meeting. I will write the text of the apology myself and email it to you. Do you agree to these terms? The silence stretched on. I heard a muffled voice in the background, probably a senior executive who had been listening in, telling him to agree. They had no choice. Yes, Preston finally choked out. I agree. Good, I said. I'll be waiting for the wire transfer confirmation. I hung up the phone. I took another sip of my tea. The dead calm had been replaced by a quiet, profound satisfaction. The wire transfer confirmation arrived 2 hours later. A car service, a black Lincoln Navigator, pulled into my driveway an hour after that. I packed a small bag, kissed Martha goodbye, and stepped into the air-conditioned luxury. The driver, a professional in a black suit, held the door for me. The flight out to Neptune 7 was different this time. I wasn't just another employee. I was the solution to a $300 million problem. When the helicopter landed, the platform was eerily quiet. The usual thrum of the generators was gone. Most of the crew had already been evacuated. A skeleton crew remained, looking grim and exhausted. Preston Whitmore was waiting for me on the helipad. He looked terrible. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his face was pale, and his eyes were wide with desperation. He had traded the loafers for a pair of ill-fitting safety boots. He started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Let's just get to work," I said, walking past him. The crewmen I passed nodded at me. There was a quiet respect in their eyes. They knew what had happened. They knew the MBA in the clean coveralls had screwed up, and the old man he'd thrown away had to be brought back to save them all. I walked into my old control room. It was just as I had left it, but now red lights were flashing everywhere, casting a hellish glow on the familiar gauges. I walked to the main console, to the small, dark square of the biometric scanner. I placed my right thumb onto the glass. There was a soft beep. The screen, which had been flashing a red warning, turned green. It read, "Operator identity confirmed. Earl J. McCaffrey, BC Cert. Number 7, 74, B, system unlocking." One by one, the hydraulic pumps whirred to life. The klaxons went silent. The red lights blinked out, replaced by steady green ones. The deep, familiar hum of the platform returned. On the main monitor, the 16 tensioner lines, which had been frozen, began their slow, steady dance once more. I had been on the platform for less than 5 minutes. I turned to Preston, who had followed me in and was staring at the console with a look of disbelief. "The platform is secure," I said. "You can tell the BSEE to stand down." I worked my 4 weeks. I didn't just keep the system running. I trained Dave, the young engineer. I showed him the things I felt, the sounds I heard. I passed on the knowledge that wasn't in the manuals. He was smart, and he was humble enough to listen. By the end of the month, he was ready to take the BSEE certification test. He would be my replacement, but one who was properly trained and respected the system he was commanding. The all-hands meeting was held in the main Houston conference room a week after I returned. It was broadcast to all the company's global offices. I stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, wearing a simple polo shirt and clean jeans. Preston Whitmore III walked to the podium. He looked smaller, diminished. He unfolded a piece of paper, the apology I had written for him. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words into the microphone. He spoke of my 34 years of flawless service, of my irreplaceable expertise, and of the grievous error in judgment that led to my termination. He apologized to me by name, his voice cracking on the last sentence. When he was done, there was a stunned silence in the room. He folded the paper and walked off the stage without making eye contact with anyone. I heard later that he was reassigned to a windowless office in a subsidiary branch in Delaware. 6 months after that, his name quietly disappeared from the company directory. His Ferragamo loafers and Dartmouth MBA hadn't prepared him for the simple, hard-won power of a man who knew which bolts to turn. My last day as a consultant, I packed my things, shook Dave's hand, and took the helicopter back to the mainland for the final time. My work was done. I didn't retire into idleness. I used the consulting money to finish restoring my 1969 Ford Mustang, a project I'd started a decade ago. The deep satisfaction of hearing that V8 engine roar to life for the first time was a victory all its own. I had dinner with Martha every night. I went to my grandkids' baseball games. I was present. I was at peace. Sometimes, when the wind blows in from the Gulf, I can almost smell the salt and diesel. I think of the massive steel island out there, held in place by a system I built and understood. They had their spreadsheets, their buzzwords, and their advanced degrees. I had 34 years of grease under my fingernails and a single obscure paragraph in a federal operations manual. Turns out only one of those things could keep a billion-dollar platform from sinking into the sea. They learned that control isn't in the title on your door. It's in the contracts, the regulations, and the knowledge you can't find in a database. They learned that some legacy systems are the only things holding the entire enterprise together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and leave a comment below telling me what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served cold.